Hey, good morning,
Good
JD.
morning.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Monday matters.
Monday matters, yeah.
I'm super excited to dive in today. I really enjoy us going through the book of James.
Great. We're getting into some juicy stuff now.
Juicy, juicy.
And,
Where do you remember where we're at?
Yes, chapter 2. We're going to be at verse 19.
Chapter 2, verse 19.
Does that sound right?
Yes. Oh, yes, because this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible.
Yeah, I
remember
actually
that.
used this passage last Sunday.
So what did you use it for?
Yesterday. Well, let's get into it.
Okay. Should we read it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you want me to read it? Okay, I'll read it. You believe that God is one. You do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. You see that a person is justified by his works and not faith alone. And in the same way, was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead.
Wow. Good stuff there. Wow. So, verse 19, you say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God. Good for you. Even the demons believe that and tremble in terror.
How'd you use that in your sermon?
Well, I was talking about how basically we have to put our faith into practice. And so I looked at that passage just a little bit. But, yeah, I mean, what do you think about that? Is it enough to, I mean, we talk about this faith that we have. Is it enough to just believe it? Or, I mean, obviously it's not enough to just believe it because demons believe it.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? And I feel like it's really, really convicting of the certain type of religion that we find that I myself fall into if I'm not careful, is that it's all up here and it's not here. Because if you truly feel, if it's here, if it's a heart thing, a priority of your heart, there's no way that you can't act it out, you know? But a lot of times we think knowing is important, but even the demons know and they shudder. Oh, I love that.
So is it possible for it to be here and here, but not here? So,
I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I'm just wondering that out loud. Because if I believe it in my head, that's one thing. If I let it sink into my heart, that's another. But to then allow my heart to move my hands, I don't know. It feels like there's that third step. Can it be in your heart without moving your hands or your feet?
I would say no, and here's why. The heart's a tricky thing, but in my view, the heart, it's sort of a list of priorities in the sense that what is most important, what's my motivator, right? And so I know that seems intellectual, but it's really not the gut motivator. So why do I eat food? Because I'm hungry. You know, I want to stay alive. Why do I do things? I think there's a reason behind every single thing we do, sometimes conscious, sometimes unconscious, and it always goes to the priorities of the heart.
Well, okay. I'm going to push back.
Okay.
Is it possible to love someone without ever telling them you love them?
I think without telling them, yes, but without acting it out, no. And that's why I hate rom-coms, and I hate romantic movies, and I hate TV and media that uses the word love, because to me, love is an action. It is a decision to sacrificially put the person ahead of you. It's not a feeling. Again, that's why what I think James is talking about here is love, true faith, true love, these things that the Bible constantly talks about. Apart from it cannot be divorced from action, or else it's fake. It's not true if it's divorced from action. What do you think?
Dramatic pause for effect.
Yeah.
Is it working?
Yeah, it is. I'm tense right now.
I don't know. I mean, I think you can believe something and not act on it for sure.
Yeah.
I think we can feel something and not act on it. I think love is a feeling, but I think it's a decision. It's I think there's a lot of people who believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and they've come to faith in Him, and they see themselves as Christ followers, although they don't live like a Christ follower.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's
What would you say is going on there? How can they believe that Christ rose from the dead but then not act it out?
yeah, it's like something. Maybe we're just really good at compartmentalizing our faith. This is my faith, and this is the rest of my life. As if it's this is my Sunday life, and this is the rest of me. I don't know.
And wouldn't you say because I know it's a temptation to fall into that. Because I think it's sort of a battling of the heart, a battling of priorities, because you can believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Again, the demons believe that.
Right.
But at the end of the day, when I wake up Tuesday morning, so not on a Sunday, right? What's more important to me is waking up, being comfortable, making money, eating my food. Is that more important to me, or is the fact that the Son of God died for me, died for my sins, and I've been called to new life through him, and I've been forgiven? That what is more important in the hierarchy of life? Not the hierarchy of life, the hierarchy of priorities. I'm thinking of Francis Chan, and I shared this, I think, the last time I was at Blue Mountain. I have a really love-hate relationship with Francis Chan because he can be really annoying. So I won't get into that. But there's one thing he said that I really, really liked in a marriage book, actually. He said it in a marriage book. A lot of times we have this list in our lives of, God first, then family, then friends. It really needs to look like God first and everything else. Like second isn't even close. Second place isn't even close, because when we put second place family close, it's so easy for us to blur those lines, to wake up Tuesday and to be selfish, to love my spouse more than I love God, to love my kids more than I love God. And I think in the book, it made it really, really clear. When you get to heaven, who are you most excited to see? 9 times out of 10, a lot of people will say, my family member, my family member that died. Sure. But that shows what the priority of your heart is. Again, at least I would say, and that's something I'm guilty of too, is constantly fighting to keep God in first place, because that's how my actions are affected. Because if God is in first place and everyone else is second, or behind, then when it comes down to, hey, am I going to make this decision or that decision, I'm weighing, how do I honor God first? And so it should affect every single decision I make, which is the actions, what I do with my life, where I'm spending my money, my time, my, everything. It should affect everything, in theory.
So then God says, JD, I want you to take your first son and I want you to tie him up and offer him as a sacrifice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's craziness.
Yeah, and to be
and the reason I say this, because that's the next verse there.
Yeah, it talks about that. Abraham as an example of faith, and to be honest, so I'm a cynic, I'm a doubter, and I really struggled with the story of Abraham offering up Isaac. I struggled so much all throughout seminary, throughout actually my entire faith journey, and it never really clicked till I don't know, about a year ago. And the way that it clicked for me is not seeing God, not seeing the scriptures, not seeing follow Jesus. It stopped being sort of like a moral code between right and wrong of, hey, these are the things I believe in the head, because demons know what right and wrong is.
Sure.
Satan knows what right and wrong is. It stopped being that, and it started being, who do I trust? Who do I put my faith in? And so faith stopped being this is the difference between right and wrong, and it started being I am fully surrendered to you, God, whether it makes sense or not. And it sounds, it's very countercultural to take that perspective, because we're going to be acting against our own self-interest, against what we think is right sometimes.
Because in that scenario where God tells Abraham, sacrifice your son.
Yeah.
In that scenario, God's the bad guy.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's like God is wanting something that is not like God. Why would God say, God detests human sacrifice, detests it. And so all of a sudden God says, I want you to sacrifice your son. And so then we find ourselves in a place where we're like, well, God, we're standing in judgment over God.
Yeah.
Like, God, you are you're the bad guy here.
Yeah.
But even though we know God wouldn't do that, God asked it, and he didn't require it, but he asked it.
See, I would say yes, but no. I think God did require it, but he required it of himself. So this is actually sort of what we talked about at Skyrocket.
Oh, now you're getting crazy
The
here.
parallels between Abraham and
Yeah.
Isaac and God and his own son, Jesus.
Uh-huh.
And about the blood covenant. We talked about how in Genesis 12, and I'd never seen this before, how God makes a covenant with Abraham by cutting these animals in half and splitting them.
Right.
And normally both people would walk through to signify the covenant being sealed. But if you go look in Genesis 12, God is the only one that walks through. So sort of this showing that God has a covenant with us, but he is the only one. He bears the brunt of our sin and shame. When we break that covenant, he's the one that pays for us messing up. And so Abraham's sacrificing of Isaac, almost this requirement, this necessary sacrifice because of our sin. And God says, oh, nope. And he sends his own son, but then he doesn't hold back. Jesus isn't saved from the cross. Jesus goes through with that death.
Wow.
Which to me was just, and I had never seen that till this week, just almost mind-blowing. And helped me look at that Isaac-Abraham story in a completely different light.
Like it's almost not almost. It's a foreshadowing of what God would do with his own son. Wow.
And who am I to stand in judgment of God saying that's not right when he would send his own son to die for me on a cross and he did not hold back? You know, it just, I don't know. I mean, it gets me emotional. And so I feel almost guilty for holding God in judgment, you know, for 3-4 years. But at least I think that's what this verse gets to. Faith apart from works. Do we trust God so much that we will do whatever he says, even if we don't agree with it?
Yeah.
Because to be quite honest, I don't know. Is there stuff in this Bible that you might disagree with, but you find yourself under its authority?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff. It feels like, I wouldn't have made that decision. You know, when God tells the Israelites, kill all of the, kill the warriors and then kill the women and children also in a couple different places. I'm like, well, that's a little extreme, God.
Yeah.
I mean, could you just let them go or chase them away or whatever? But no, God's like, purge the land. And yet, I have to trust that God knows something that I'm not understanding here.
Yeah. And even in the New Testament, I came to bring division, father will turn against son, brother against sister. I don't like that verse.
Mm-hmm.
I love my family.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. There's stuff here that I still wrestle with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now that doesn't mean though that this is an exception. This isn't the rule that God tells us, well, go sacrifice your child.
Yeah.
This, Abraham is the one that God made this covenant with, and that's not something that I guess what I'm trying to say is if somebody thinks God is saying go sacrifice your kid, don't do it. I mean, that is not for everybody. That was, a one-off event that God was speaking to Abraham. And so, every once in a while you'll hear of somebody who killed their children because they said, God told me to do it.
God told them to. It's normally mental illness.
Right.
And
we might have thought that he was mentally ill.
Yeah.
Although Abraham did tell Sarah, I'll be back. We will be back. He didn't say, I'm coming back alone. He said, we'll be back.
And that's so, and I heard the perspective as I was doing my study for the sermon that Abraham believed so strongly that God could raise from the dead, that he believed he was going to sacrifice his son, but that God would raise him up because of God's promise to build a nation through him, which is, again, sort of that foreshadowing, and it gets to the point we will be back, right? Foreshadowing of the resurrection of Christ.
What do you think of that? That is just mind-blowing stuff.
It is. It really is. And it just goes to, what does it mean to have faith? It's this absolute trust in God that results in action.
Did anybody really believe in resurrection back then?
No.
Because that was a really rare...
Yeah. I mean, do we believe in it now? Does anyone believe in it now? I mean, we say we do, but...
Yeah.
Resurrection is crazy.
Well, it is crazy, but even especially then, nobody had really seen anybody resurrected.
Yeah.
It was this idea that you would die and go into this shadow land kind of thing, and someday at the end of time, there would be a resurrection. But there wasn't an understanding of resurrection like we think of when we think of Jesus.
Yeah.
But apparently Abraham
held to it.
Had that faith that God was going to resurrect him.
It's this absolute trust in God and trust in his promises that we should strive to every day. Can I ask you real quick before we move on? I see this word justified a lot. One of the biggest misconceptions, at least ways that I've seen James interpreted wrongly, is that we are saved through works. There's several religions, several sects of Christianity, whether you want to call them sects or religions or whatever, that hold to you are saved through your works. It's sort of like this turn or burn theology that your salvation depends on what you do. What is justification, and how is that conception wrong? Is justification the same as salvation, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, that's a good question. You know, that's a deep question. I think in this context, specifically in this context, we're saved through our faith, but our faith probably isn't real unless we live it. And so, in this sense, we're justified because we're actually, I don't know, I'm going to have to unpack that, but it's proof that our faith is real if we're actually living it out. Just like, you say you love your wife, but you never go home. You say you love your wife, but you never provide. You say, that kind of thing. Well, do you really love your wife?
Exactly.
Probably not.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, in maybe worldwide, but I would say in the West, because it's just so easy in the West. And it's the only experience I've ever had in my life, right? Because I'm from the West. So in the Western world, it's so easy to have our life and then our faith, and they're different compartments. And if those two don't blend together, and if it's not all squiggled together like spaghetti, I don't think
your faith is worth much.
I don't think your faith is worth much.
Yeah.
Or that it even might be dead.
Because exactly like you said, I'm thinking of this imagery of a tree, a flower, whatever you want to call it. We're not saved by our works at all. We're saved by grace through faith, which means, I can mess up. The second I accept God's gift of forgiveness, boom, that's salvation. But if we have truly experienced that change, if the Holy Spirit has truly come into us, if we've truly accepted that, it's like the flower. Is it dead? Is the flower dead? Is the tree dead? Is it producing fruit or not? It's like the fig tree that Jesus curses. We're not saved by our works, but if we have true faith, it is inevitable that the works will be there. It's almost like, it's like the sign. Is the plant alive or dead? Is the tree alive or dead? You just look at the flowers. You're not saved by the flowers or the fruit. You're saved by the tree being alive or not. The life that God's given that tree. But it's really easy to tell. You just look, and I'm with you. It's this compartmentalization has really hindered the church moving forward for so long, because you look at, you look at whether you want to look at statistics or perception across many different ways of life, ways of living. The church is a little bit better than the general public when you look at terms of happiness, divorce, giving, a little bit better, but there's not that wide of a gap, as much of a gap as you would think or hope. I don't know.
Yeah,
So it's,
I don't know about that. I think in terms of giving, for sure. Typically, church people tend to give, and there's a now not all church people give, but if you've learned to give tithe 10% of what you make over your lifetime, that becomes a fortune.
It's
you're
a lot.
giving away,
Yeah.
and most people, even generous people, don't give away 10% of their income. I mean, maybe they give 0.5% or something like that, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah. It's harder for a rich person to give 10% than a poor person. It almost feels like that.
I feel like I just ran on a bunny trail. You said something a minute ago about you come to faith, and then you're forgiven, and you're counted as part of the family, and then we get to this verse. Is it verse 25? Yeah. So Rahab, she's a prostitute, right? And she was shown to be right with God by her actions when she hid those messengers and sent them safely away by a different road. All right. So here's a prostitute who is, she makes her money by selling her body, and that's sin. I don't know why she's in prostitution. Maybe that was her only way to survive. So there's all these possibilities, but suddenly she does one thing, and it's counted as faith, and it changes the trajectory of her future. She's in the line, basically of Jesus.
Yeah.
it's like instant. She goes from 1 minute, excuse the language, but she's turning a trick, I guess, in 1 minute, and the next minute she's this woman of faith.
Yeah. So in Joshua 2, because what I would say is, where did salvation come in? It's not the fact that she hid the men, but if we go to Joshua 2, reading, she says this in Joshua 2 verses 9, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea, and yada, yada, yada. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath.
Okay, so that's faith, right?
That is a statement of faith.
Yes.
And that's what I would say the salvation comes in, right?
Okay.
She lived her whole life doing things. We don't know her backstory, but doing things that's sin.
Yeah.
And whether you're a prostitute or not, we all live in sin. Our story before God is full of sin. And then she makes this statement of faith.
Right.
The Lord your God, he is God in heavens above and on the earth beneath. That's faith. And I
Yeah.
believe that's the instant that, boom.
There's a change in who she is. Suddenly
Yes.
she's moved from an unbeliever who is opposed to these people, but suddenly the story seeps in and she comes to faith. Yeah.
Yeah. And then that faith produces the action of her hiding the men, of going through with all of that. And so that's where I would say the difference between saved by works through faith. The faith was there.
Yeah.
And I think it's so cool that Joshua 2 gives us that witness, her testimony of faith. Not just, she hid the spies. No, she testified to God's power that he is Lord and God of all. And then it resulted in the works. Yeah.
Tremendous stuff. Yeah. Yeah. And then when, as you read on, the walls tumble down and she escapes and she becomes a Jew.
Yeah. And then, like you said, she becomes a part of the lineage, which is just so, so cool. Awesome. You think that's all we've got for James 2? Anything else you want to cover?
That's it. There's so much there. But I think the key element is it's not enough to just believe it.
Yeah.
We have to let it sink from our head into our heart.
Yeah.
And then let that move our hands or our feet.
Yep.
Because that's the evidence that it actually moved from here to here.
Yep. One thought experiment I like to play around with is I like to try to check Megan and my family's life. What would our lives look like if Jesus didn't rise from the dead? If we didn't believe any of this, we didn't attend church, what would we be doing? What would our daily habits be, our weekly habits? How would we be living our life? And if it's too similar to the way that we live now, then something's wrong. Is what we hold faith in, is it truly shown through our actions? Because if it's not, then we need to do some internal processing because there's probably something, misaligned here in the heart. Yeah.
Wow. So I can't even comprehend a world where Jesus didn't rise from the dead, because almost everything that we know in this life has been shaped by the fact that Jesus rose from the dead and this church went out and did great things.
Yeah.
And, from hospitals to schools to, just so much of science, so much of life as we know it would not be like it is. Mm-hmm. Who knows what it would be like? I have no idea. Women have freedom to vote and all kinds of, those are all a result of Christ followers.
It's changed. Jesus rising from the dead, their faith, it's changed the fabric of the world.
Absolutely.
And it's our
job.
For the better. And it's our job to make sure it changes the way I live and the way that my family lives, the way that we all live too. Yeah.
Wowzers. Good stuff. Hey, that's all we got time for today. But,
Monday matters.
Join us next week.